Shalom. This week's Sedra Vayigash. Yosef and his brothers' dramatic travails take center stage in this week's Torah reading. From the jealousy aimed at Yosef when he was a younger man, to Yosef's immature behavior, to his brothers selling him, to the false accusations levied against him by Potiphar's wife, to his time in jail and to his rise until second command in Paro's palace, the events of the past episodes in Sefer Bereshit have both been simultaneously chaotic and divinely ordered. The last part of this episode occurs at the start of this week's Torah portion. Yosef reveals his true identity to his brothers. Shocked, Yosef needs to find the words that will calm his brothers' fears of revenge. Yosef declared to his brothers, "I am Yosef. Is my father still alive?" Hashem records that Yosef's brothers could not answer him because they were startled by Yosef and his news. Yosef went on to say, "I am your brother Yosef, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here, for it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. 2 years of famine have passed in the midst of the land, and for another 5 years there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to make for you a remnant in the land, and to preserve it for you for a great deliverance. You did not send me here, but God did, and he made me a father to Paro, a lord over all his household, and a ruler over the entire land of Egypt." Yosef reassured his brothers that their actions did not cause him any harm, but were all part of divine scheme to ensure the Jewish people's survival. His remarks were aimed at his brothers' anxiety, and they hit their mark. The repetition of his words is curious. Yosef began by identifying himself as Yosef, and then proving his identity by saying that he had been sold. Yosef then assures his brothers, telling him that it was to preserve life that God sent me. He then seemingly proves his point by saying that there had been and will continue to be famine in the land. He then repeats himself again and said, "You did not send me here, but God did." Why does Yosef repeat that God sent him? Let's take a step back and look at the history behind this. The straw that broke the camel's back more than 2 decades before was Yosef revealing his dreams to his brothers. Yosef's brothers were skeptical about his claims of prophecy, and there was no reason for Yosef to think that at this point his brothers' opinions had changed about him. Yosef had to make it clear that he wasn't a wide-eyed teenager, but rather a divine tool, meant to ensure the continuation of ethical monotheism and the generations of the Jewish people. Yosef must prove 2 things to his brothers. The first, that God sent him, and the second, that God's plan was actually coming to fruition. In his new role as second in command in Egypt, the leader of his family, it was important that Yosef established himself as a messenger of God and not just a common man. Yosef's message to his brothers wasn't meant to simply reassure them, but to restart the relationship on different grounds. His brothers would never be able to transition to their new lives in Egypt without respecting Yosef in his new role. Then they needed to follow his lead, heed his advice, and be deferential to him. This could only happen if they understood Yosef to be a messenger of God. They would only believe him to be a messenger of God if he repeated the message and they understood it. He had to make it abundantly clear to them, and he used repetition as a tool to make sure he accomplished that. Even if one isn't a Yosef and they aren't leading a family or a nation, there are times where relationships take a turn for the worse. The healthy way of rehabilitating those relationships isn't trying to get back to the same point where the relationship broke, but rather to try to calibrate the relationship to be established at a new point. That's what Yosef was doing, and it's a great lesson for us when we need to reestablish and restart a relationship. Shabbat Shalom.